Welcome everyone to the 5th debate of the year for University Philosophical Society's 341st session. I call on the registrar to the minutes of the last public business meeting. Here.
So, Fulcher over, Vodka and discourse. Note, before we begin with what promises to be a thought-provoking and perhaps very difficult debate, Leahy May on Nuach and Seachtain Show very briefly. On Seachtain xoxo, we had party representatives in our Uachtaráin debate from Fianna Fáil and Labour, including Labour Party leader Ivana Bacik, who will be returning to the Phil for our prisons debate. Day Hina tomorrow, we are hosting the GM bar starting at 7:30 p.m. It takes from €5. We're basically turning the top of the GMB into a bar and a kind of party place, and the proceedings are going to Irish Cancer Society and the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. So please be there. And actually, also tonight, we've obviously got our wine afters, and then the afters are in Chaplin's. Okay. Now next week at this time, we'll be hosting a debate. This house would sell out, featuring fellow of Trinity College Dublin and practicing barrister Neville Cox. And tonight, folks, the house has proposed that it regrets the rise of OnlyFans. Tonight, given the sensitivity of the topic, we will be having an exciting but serious debate. Ní Karras ASK AOC is a mass and rules topic to diasporic show. With that, the minutes are concluded, and we can let the debate begin. So, thank you.
Secretary, are there reports to be read?
There are no reports to be read.
The time for questions is now open.
Madam Secretary, are there any motions on notice?
There are no motions on notice.
Secretary, are there any motions not on notice?
There are no motions not on notice.
Time for questions is now closed.
Any general business? With that, we conclude this public meeting. I call on the Secretary to collect our speakers for tonight's debate. Here.
Is a debate that asks us to question in the abstract. The House has proposed not that OnlyFans should be illegal, not that pornography should be illegal. It proposes and says something of a more emotive and instinctive nature. This debate with different wording could have been one on basic legal principles and human rights, the right to bodily autonomy, to privacy, freedom of expression and association. Tonight, instead, we welcome an argument that is a little less technical and a little more human. OnlyFans was founded in 2016 for niche content creators to connect to fans and quickly became a way for sexual workers to monetize their content. OnlyFans transactions rose 7-fold during the lockdown of 2020, and the company reached 120 million users. In 2021, they announced a banning of pornographic content, with OnlyFans CEO Tim Stokely claiming the banks they worked with did not want to be associated with sex work at all. Days after this announcement, the CEO thanked everyone, quote, for making your voices heard and reversed this decision. Perhaps unsurprising, as 70% of creators post only adult content. What appeared to have been a lockdown spike in users did not slow down. In 2024, OnlyFans reported a gross revenue of $7.2 billion, reaching 305 million users and 4.1 million creators. 4.1 million people making money from OnlyFans, who may have been given a level of independence and safety and income difficult in mainstream adult entertainment. And no doubt we'll hear arguments of that kind from opposition speakers better than I can eloquate. One thing appears objective, however. OnlyFans as a company by nature tends towards the extreme, not in its content alone, which will be better discussed by our speakers, but also in its wealth distribution. 0.1% of creators, 1 in 1,000, generate 76% of the total revenue. The average creator, on the other hand, makes just $160 a month. It is a winner-takes-all industry. On the other end of the laptop screen, there's a similar extreme. There is a group that make up 0.01% of consumers, 1 in 10,000, that pay over 20% of that revenue. Addicts. But this is not something targeted just at lonely single men. In fact, a survey showed that 89% of subscribers are in fact married, and only 63% are male. It raises the question regarding our regret. Even if the opposition does establish that OnlyFans can be a net good for creators, can they establish that it is ever a net good for consumers? Tonight, we are absolutely delighted to have a group more than qualified to tackle these questions with the delicacy and reason they deserve. I will list the names of our speakers, and if it's okay, we can cheer and clap for them as team proposition together and team opposition together. Proposition and opposition. For our opening, we have Harper Alderson, Deputy Editor of the University Times, followed by Arna Dixit, who is a master's student in Women's and Gender Studies. She has a podcast called Dirty Talk for discussing sex and sexuality. On last show, we have Aliyah Mullen, our very own Phil O'Toole. If you've seen any Phil videos, TikToks or YouTube, that's all her. So we'll give that side a round of applause. Now tonight, we are very privileged to have two fantastic guest speakers coming in. Dr. Ruth Karras is a Trinity history professor, a scholar of medieval women, gender and sexuality. She has written 5 of her own books and contributed to countless more, writing on themes of slavery, prostitution and masculinity. Following of Northern Irish woman Meghan O'Neill, who is perhaps Ireland's most successful OnlyFans model and one of the most financially successful people in adult entertainment worldwide. Now, discourse. We have Marion Healy, President of the Eliz Subcommittee of the Phil, so we'll give them a bull of bus as well. To our speakers, Ganara and Tolav, Gatian looked fake and they saw us more, Aisha, Vansha, and Ishis Fadelin, Diasporic, the Hussy. Thank you very much.
University Philosophical Society. Tonight's debate before the House is "This House regrets the rise of OnlyFans." Speaking orders are as follows. At 1 minute, and at the first minute of every speech, at the last minute of every speech, you'll hear a bell. Speeches are 7 minutes for our students and 10 minutes for our guests. We prioritise dignity and respect at all our debates, especially debates on nights like these. If you hear anything that you don't like this evening, our senior member of council, Ross Bulger, can be seen there. You can speak to him after at our post-reception and our afters this evening. You can be contacted at SMC at TCD Phil. Alternatively, I can be contacted at President at TCD Phil. With that said, we'll begin our debate, and I call on Helper Ellerson to open the sign for the proposition. Here.
Getting myself sorted. Thank you. Great. I first just want to thank the Phil for having me. I really appreciate it, and our guest speakers especially, and everybody speaking in this debate. This conversation is extremely important, and it is amazing that it is being given the respect that it deserves. I want to start by saying that online pornography is violent without exception. Violent online pornography legitimizes rape by packaging it as sex. I regret the rise of OnlyFans because it has contributed to the proliferation of online pornography and normalized pornographic sex. Patriarchy can never be dismantled until the eroticization of rape and women's suffering is done away with entirely. This argument has nothing to do with individuals who participate in sex work. I am sure my fellow debaters on prop will more than enlighten the audience on the wickedness of sex trafficking and incidents of real rapes ending up online, but in the name of time, I'm going to focus on the system of online pornography and the hand that OnlyFans has in it, because I would say the same thing about AI pornography and other forms of pornography that do not directly harm creators. When we discuss pornography among friends, we talk about the industry or porn addiction, but we don't say what exactly is so bad, and I think violence is the problem. In a study of the 500 most popular videos, women were found to respond positively to physical aggression 97.4% of the time on Pornhub and 92.7% of the time on Xvideos. This is defined, physical violent aggression, as asphyxiation, choking, open-handed slapping, gagging, and related acts. In a similar study of the 4,000 most popular videos on Pornhub, it was found that 88.2% of scenes contained physical acts of aggression. Women were the targets in 97% of these scenes. When people watch pornography, they are watching sexual violence. It is more difficult for women to identify what rape is when that becomes what sex is for men. Such videos legitimate and even celebrate aggression, degradation, portraying these acts as consensual and even pleasurable. They reinforce the idea that women desire and derive pleasure from aggressive and degrading sexual practices, an idea that serves to perpetuate a rape culture. My question is, when we talk about dismantling rape culture, why don't we urgently demand the boycott and destruction of online pornography? Pornography is not just fantasy. It is an easily accessible template for actual sexual behavior. 1 in 10 men and 1 in 35 women report porn addiction, and about 80% of men and 30% of women in Ireland watch porn weekly. Pornography eroticizes the domination of women, the subjugation, degradation, violation, and fragmentation of the female body. It defines sex as the act of using a woman. The grammar of pornography is penetration, violation, and humiliation. Pornography transforms male power into sexual excitement and female degradation into sexual identity. When hierarchy is eroticized, equality becomes unthinkable. Pornography tells men what they are entitled to and tells women what they are for. To liberate sexuality, patriarchy itself must be dismantled. Pornography can't be reformed because it exists to eroticize inequality. This is rape-supportive discourse, and OnlyFans has put this in the mainstream. OnlyFans users are 70% men. 90% of OnlyFans users report learning about sex through OnlyFans, with those under 25 reporting learning the most. Mainstream pornographic logic is commercialized intimacy, algorithmic desirability, and performative empowerment. When I was in high school, I had a boyfriend who followed probably 200 OnlyFans models on Instagram and porn stars. I remember asking him why, and I begged him to unfollow them, and not even really for an ideological reason, but just because it was pretty humiliating for an otherwise pretty smart and well-respected man to be so openly porn-addled. And then he finally told me why he did, and he said, "I've just followed them for so long, they're like my friends." It is a fact that young men are learning about sex through pornography first. This educational gap between young men and women means that in first-time heterosexual sexual encounters, young men are armed with a litany of violent tips and tricks learned through pornography that are normal online, ready to be deployed on young women who do not have the same knowledge base. This is a social contagion. When young people start with choking, slapping, hitting, and gagging, where do we go from there? How does it end? And does a normal sexual encounter have to be painful and violent? We don't have to give young men or women the choice for how long they have, we don't give men or women a choice for how they have sexual encounters. We just give them the internet, throw them in the deep end, and hope for the best. In fact, violent pornography exposure, according to one study, was the #1 predictor of first-time sexual violence for young men. The language of OnlyFans and the language of porn changed when OnlyFans came into the mainstream. It changed from sex work to content creation and performers to entrepreneurs. This rebranding made porn culturally palatable, and it uses influencer logic. Porn was previously treated as a shadow economy, and it is now financially and socially integrated into Silicon Valley's influencer capitalism. The PR strategy is post-feminist. It's about empowerment and autonomy. But this feminist lexicon was co-opted to sanitize porn's image. It rebranded subordination as entrepreneurship. Sexual liberation is the desexualization of dominance. A culture of sexual equality would not just uncensor, but it would reconstruct desire around reciprocity, not possession. And I believe my opponents will say a lot of things. We'll talk about freedom of speech, and we'll talk about empowerment. And on self-empowerment, in a study of 104 former sex workers conducted in Stockholm that made money not on OnlyFans before OnlyFans started, it was found in a similar content creation service, it was found that 37% had been filmed while being sexually violated by adults before turning 18, and 84% had been raped, 52% had been coerced, and 74% experienced serious physical injuries. 65% had either made suicide attempts or engaged in another form of self-harm. 81% had PTSD, and 71% said they'd been coerced into making porn. And then on free speech, it is my opinion that mass pornography and the way that we have become literally addicted to pornography everywhere online and how OnlyFans has put it in the mainstream is actually a civil injury. To be subordinated is to be treated as inferior, violable, and unequal in status and protection. Pornography enacts subordination by defining women as things to be used and violated. This is a denial of full personhood, and it constitutes as sex discrimination, which is civil, which overrides any cry for free speech. Freedom of speech does not include the right to reduce women to body parts and call it sex. Thank you so much.
Speech and call on Dr. Ruth Karras to open this up for the opposition. Here.
I regret patriarchy and I regret capitalism. Given the world we live in, I don't regret the rise of OnlyFans, but I'm not an expert on OnlyFans, so I am going to talk about something on which I am more of an expert, which is sort of the history of sex work and sex-related work, and not so much pornography, because you don't get pornography as we know it today before the rise of photography and printing and motion pictures. You can envision some medieval monk, spending days making one little picture that then has to be passed around from hand to hand because there's most mass reproduction. They didn't have that, or at least they didn't have it in a widespread manner, let's say. But there certainly was sex work and sex-related work, and I'm going to use sex work in the very most general sense. Going, as they say, prostitution is the oldest profession. If you go back to ancient Rome, sex workers were enslaved women who would be purchased by brothel keepers. Men as well, and probably non-binary people too, but since most of the sex workers throughout history were women, probably including trans women, I'm going to talk mainly about women here. These women would be entertainers or prostitutes, allowed sometimes, based on the generosity of their owners, to keep a few tips, rarely enough to purchase their freedom. Their best hope would be for a customer to buy them as a slave and they would just work for one person instead of publicly. In the Middle Ages, religious authorities said that prostitution was an outlet for men. They had sort of a hydraulic model of sex, that if men, that the brothel in a town is like the sewer in a house, that it may not smell that good, but if you don't have one, it's going to stink up the whole house. And basically they are putting the burden not on men to reduce their hydraulic desires, but on sex workers to fulfill that desire to keep so-called respectable women from being raped. The church taught that sex workers did not engage in that work for pay. They engaged in it because they were sex mad, and that it was, because they were sluts, essentially, and so it was not really treated as work. The sex workers could not legally be raped because they were deemed to have already given consent to everyone, and therefore to rape them could not be a crime. Women, of course, to avoid abuse from customers, turned to pimps who took most of the money and often abused the women themselves. Getting a bit out of the Middle Ages now and into the rise of capitalism, more women are in the workforce, more men and women are in the paid workforce. Both men and women are selling their labor at very low rates because they have no alternatives. And of course, one of the kinds of labor that is sold is sexual labor. Alcohol addiction becomes a problem, and drug addiction. Opium from the activities of the imperial powers in China floods the market in Europe, and people have to turn to sex work as a way of funding their opium habit. Legislation in the 19th century against sex work was aimed theoretically at making the situation better for the workers, but in reality, legislation is promoted mostly by middle-class women who didn't want to see streetwalkers. So they wanted to make sure that everything would be sort of kept under wraps and away from respectable women. The Venereal Disease Acts in the United Kingdom thought that the problem was not the exploitation of workers, nor any degradation of society because of the existence of sex work, but the fact that sailors from the British Navy were getting venereal diseases from the sex workers, and therefore the solution was to keep the women locked up and to get very intrusive examinations for venereal disease regularly, so that they would still be available to the sailors, but not be able to infect them. This is sort of the history of the exploitation of women by the sex trade. And I wouldn't disagree with Harper that the exploitation of women by the sex trade continues or is exacerbated with the rise of photography, motion pictures, and even the internet. It led to a split in feminism where some wanted to stop pornography and indeed all sex work because it panders to men's worst instincts and women ought to be protected, whereas others argued that it should be women's choice what to do with their bodies. And organizations of sex workers themselves were agitating for better working conditions. What is a feminist to do in this case? And now I think I'm going to have to talk a little bit about OnlyFans, which, unlike the historical aspect, is not really my area of expertise. But OnlyFans is not the beginning of mass pornography by any means. And in an ideal world, there would be no power imbalance in sexual relationships. And in an ideal world, everyone would find mutually fulfilling partnerships and would only engage in sort of dominance if it was something that both partners wanted to engage in as a kind of play. We don't live in that world. In an ideal world, there would be well-paying jobs with decent working conditions for everyone who wants them and an adequate basic income for those who are unable to work. But that's not the world we live in either. Women's wages and opportunities still tend to be considerably lower than men's. The world in which we live has monetized everything. So how does OnlyFans fit into this? Well, for one thing, compared to other types of sex-related work, it can be a lot less exploitative. Performers receive a much higher percentage of the revenue, and it may be the case that most performers are not making a living from it. You could say that of a whole lot of other fields as well. Performers perform via a screen, so they are not in physical danger. Given the general greed and misogyny by, which we're inundated with in society today, OnlyFans does allow some women to turn it to their advantage. It may be far from an ideal situation, but it may allow people to conduct sex work in the manner that they would like to do it, rather than in the exploitative manner that most societies have known. Certainly, it is a great improvement over the way women have used their sexuality to earn money throughout history. And that is why, although I can regret some of the circumstances that have given rise to OnlyFans, I do not regret its existence as a means for performers to earn money through sexual performance. Thank you.
Speech and call on Dixon to continue the sign for the proposition. Here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here tonight. I think some wonderful points have been made already, both about the prevalence of sexually violent media in our society, which is very important to consider, as well as the context of capitalism and patriarchy that has always existed. Also, the wonderful introduction, which set the tone for how OnlyFans functions, and I'm going to be sort of capitulating on that a bit more. So for today, I'm going to be taking, not necessarily considering how this impacts consumers, but how this also impacts creators. And I'll be taking a sex workers' rights perspective. I take issue not with the existence of OnlyFans itself or with opportunities for safe sex work, but rather with the rise of OnlyFans in the current global context, its prevalence in mainstream discourse, and how this has impacted conversations around sex work. Through such an online platform, as has been indicated, sex work is further commodified. OnlyFans turns sex work into a spectacle. And while, yes, sexuality and gendered bodies have always been seen as a spectacle throughout history, this sort of online mechanism further capitalizes on this while confusing the realities of what it means to be a sex worker in our society. It brings up questions regarding equity and access within the sex work industry. So my argument will be a twofold argument, considering the lack of advocacy for sex workers' rights in our society, as well as how these platforms like OnlyFans distort conversations surrounding sex work. Firstly, I'll be talking about the illusion of agency. OnlyFans has become a major part of modern online culture and considered a way to empower those engaging in sex work. But it is important to disentangle how it impacts its creators, audiences, and larger conversations regarding sex work. OnlyFans seems to promote a fantasy of autonomy, agency, and success for its creators. Take control of your sexuality and monetize it on your own terms. However, this often obscures the true reality of the sex work industry as well as OnlyFans. It is important to recognize the capitalistic and patriarchal underpinnings of the sex work industry and how OnlyFans is a part of this. A Marxist feminist critique would argue that OnlyFans does not always lead to social and economic empowerment, but often perpetuates individual and industry-wide exploitation. So I'm going to talk now about something that was sort of brought up in the introduction regarding the difference in income and experience in the hierarchy of OnlyFans, which has actually been termed the whorearchy in a study published in the Archives for Sexual Behavior. So thinking about how OnlyFans has shaped the discourse around sex work and how sex workers are impacted by the rise of OnlyFans. The dynamics of OnlyFans, as sort of Harper brought up, are largely shaped by post-feminist neoliberalist discourse. This contributes to this phenomena of the whorearchy, favoring socially acceptable forms of sex work over others, and creating a divide between online and offline sex workers. This hierarchy perpetuates stigma by marginalizing sex workers for not adhering to traditional expectations and attributing their disadvantaged status to personal choices. This hierarchy is further reinforced by mechanisms like shadow banning, which exploit sex workers while profiting off of them. Additionally, it is important to note that OnlyFans isn't always as pro-sex worker as some might think. OnlyFans is often best if you already have a platform, so to say, the whole influencer culture of it all. And established influencers and celebrities can make a lot of money, but for an average person, it takes months to gain enough subscribers to even live off of, let alone for it to be truly lucrative. The percentage ranking system makes it competitive and hierarchical, and a study in 2022 showed that the average, as again was mentioned in the introduction, average OnlyFans creator makes only $160 a month, while already wealthy celebrities and influencers make 33% of the total revenue. It is crucial to reflect upon the hierarchical nature of OnlyFans and the barriers that many sex workers continue to face on the app. For example, some examples of this sort of hierarchy are high-profile success stories like rapper Bad Barbie, who made a record-breaking $1 million in 6 hours, surpassing actor Bella Thorne, who previously brought in $1 million in 1 day. One has to think how this impacts sex workers who are trying to use OnlyFans to make their livelihood. Moreover, what adds to barriers for the sex worker and exacerbates this hierarchy is issues of job security and safety concerns. OnlyFans' predictability, such as the banning of pornographic images for a short while, and lack of job security has made many hesitant to use the platform. Additionally, if you do full-service sex work outside of OnlyFans, regardless of their legality, your account can be shut down and your earnings seized, which poses issues for many sex workers and furthers the divide between offline and online sex sex workers. Often, sex workers prefer to use self-owned platforms and websites that give them more control. And of course, there are many safety concerns regarding data and surveillance with such an online platform. There's also questions of safety for younger creators, as OnlyFans brings this avenue of accessibility for sex work without the awareness that is needed regarding the risks of going into this type of work. So, when we're thinking about sex work and prostitution, this is of course a topic that has divided feminists largely. However, when we think about OnlyFans, what I want to bring to mind is that even if OnlyFans was meant to be something that could transform sex work in our society, I don't think it's doing that in the way that we want it to. And it's important for us to, I'm not trying to deny the platform or the livelihood that it may provide to many. I'm mostly questioning its current worship and the commotion surrounding it. It's important for us to interrogate the multifaceted and nuanced impacts of OnlyFans on the sex work industry, and important to have these conversations to challenge the stigma around sex, sexuality, and sex workers' rights. Thank you.
For a very kind speech, and calling Meghan O'Neill to continue the debate. Here.
Good evening, ladies and sons of ladies. I am probably the most educated in the room to actually talk about this, not on obviously everything that you have to say, but I'm going to go on a different sort of angle. My name is Meghan O'Neill. I'm currently studying a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and Psychology at the Open University. I want to later complete my PhD. By the way, I need to apologise. I am so tired. I had 2 hours sleep last night, so if you see me yawning, it's not because I'm bored, it's because I am exhausted. I am an accomplished athlete and currently Ireland's only women's only bare knuckle fighter. So in 2023, I rose to fame with OnlyFans. I joined OnlyFans and I became one of the world's top 1% creators in 10 days. So obviously this was massive. This went into the news, I was on the TV, I was on the radio. It kind of took me by surprise. I was a model from I was 15. I then went to glamour modelling at 18. Sexuality for me was always a massive part. I was always very interested by pornography. I studied TV and film for 4 years when I left school, and I did a very small documentary on porn and sort of the psychology behind it, and obviously that's what I want to go and do my PhD in. I find it fascinating, the topic. You know, I feel very much, I use humour a lot. I feel like everybody needs to get their knickers out of a twist. Sex is our life force. We are all here because of sex. We have all had sex, well, probably most of us. For me, I look at it from a very different lens. I'm also a mother, and the reason I left that out to the end is because you probably feel in your body a little bit more prejudice towards me because I am a mother and not a sort of single person doing this. Mothers do get a bit more of a bad rap for being porn stars. Obviously, I forgot to mention I am a mainstream porn star as well. See, I said this to you earlier. I was like, I have ADHD, so I'm gonna go from one thing and then I'm gonna go to the next. What was I saying? Does anybody remember what I was saying? Yes, the sort of lens that I'm going to come at it. So when I was studying philosophy, I found it very interesting that when I started studying the Virgin Mary, I was brought up Catholic, I was taught by nuns, and this is important because I never really grasped it. You know, in school we were taught that Mary was a virgin, but we were also taught in science the biology of how to have a baby. So this was kind of a question. This was kind of a question I was kind of asked all the time, and they were very disgusted. I was taught by nuns, they were raging that I was asking this question, but philosophy is the art of asking questions, so I picked the right degree. When I started studying the Virgin Mary and Cleopatra, it was about reputations, which the book is actually there, I started to notice this sort of idea of this shame and this horrible, sort of disgusting, sinful language around sex. Mary was actually, I think it was Pope Pius the 9th, if I'm right. He actually said that Mary herself was born of a virgin birth. So she actually was born free from original sin. This was his quote. So these words around sex, these words, it goes so much deeper. Everything you're saying is 100% correct, and I'm really, really passionate about the topics that we're discussing, especially patriarchy, feminism. You know, I always say I'm not a feminist because I'm a misandrist. I don't believe men are equal. I believe I'm better than men. Now that is obviously a joke. Your face, it's a joke. Her face. I have a son. I'm only joking. As I said, I use humour. But for me, it's so much deeper than just, you know, what the arguments here today are very sort of, you know, today's word and obviously the historical evidence that the doctor has brought herself. But for me, it's so much about patriarchy and where that stemmed from. When I looked at Cleopatra and I was studying Cleopatra and the way the Arabics and the Romans talked about her, it was completely different. You know, the Romans really painted her as this seductress, and the Arabics talked about her as a scholar. You know, she was a doctor and she done, you know, X, Y, and Z. So for me, whenever I started OnlyFans, I got a mixed reception. I got a lot of support. There's a lot more support than there is hate. The hate's just that little bit louder. But for me, OnlyFans brings a freedom of empowerment. And I actually brought the definition of empowerment because I knew somebody would ask. So the definition of empowerment: authority or power given to someone to do something. The process of becoming stronger and more confident, especially in controlling one's life. So obviously I say I'm a feminist and people will argue, you know, well, that's not what empowerment is. But empowerment is literally the art of choosing for yourself. I feel extremely empowered, but I look at porn in a very different lens. I edit my own work. I look at it like art. So when I'm creating art, and it is beautiful to me. It's not this seedy. I'm in the industry. The industry is not seedy. It's not disgusting. Obviously, there have been sex trafficking and exploitation does happen, but OnlyFans actually gives the creator the power themselves, be it man, woman, whatever. That gives you the power to decide what you want to do. So for me, OnlyFans it created so much freedom, financial freedom and freedom to express. You know, I've been able to give my kids everything that I would never have been able to give them on this the society that we live in now, the way the wages are working. You know, OnlyFans for me give me that level of I can do whatever I want and I can stay at home. I had a very successful gym. I was a female-only gym owner. I left it to be in the porn industry. I felt very passionate, not only about being in the industry, but also when I come out of the industry, I want to use myself as a primary research into my PhD when I later do it, probably be 40-odd when I do it by the time I get to do it. But I want to be the primary research. I want to know exactly what goes on in the industry. You know, there's this idea that it is this horrible, dirty, and the way people talk about it is, again, I keep pulling back to this narrative that it's shameful and it's guilty. There's this guilt, there's this shame, there's this sinful discussion around it, and it's just not the case whenever you're in the industry. I myself have found the industry is so supportive. The people that I have met will be friends for life. They are beautiful characters. It is such a colourful industry of all different people. They are massively inclusive. And I think that standing up here tonight to be the voice of them is such a privilege because we are a minority and we have so many people looking down their noses at us. My sort of, the thing that I want to challenge is the stigma. What does somebody in the sex industry look like? What do they act like? When I went into the industry, I had a lot of things said about me online, about I didn't have my kids, I was a drug addict, you know, X, Y, and Z, none of which is true. But there's this idea that somebody in the sex industry doesn't get the choice. They're there because they don't get the choice. They're trafficked into it, or it's their last, you know, choice. It wasn't my last choice. And for a lot of my fellow colleagues, it's not their last choice. We are in it because we feel passionate about it. For me, I want to change the world in a way that I actually put I did my own primary research in this, and I actually said, what is the biggest sort of thing that people don't like about my industry and what I do? And it was the glamorization of it, and I completely agree. I am so upfront with people, and I say, you're not going to earn this money. I was very lucky because I had a massive platform, as you were talking about the influencer thing. I already had a massive platform. I was already a model. I was already an athlete. You know, I had all of this already, so it was very easy for me to create that money, but that's not how it is. So I always say to people, I don't think anybody under 25 should be doing OnlyFans because of the development of the brain. Your prefrontal cortex is not developed enough to make those decisions. It is long-lasting. So the glamorization was the sort of main thing that people came to me and said they hated about it, and I was like, I completely agree. I don't think it's for everybody. You have to have tough skin. You go into this industry, it is not for everybody, okay? You go into this industry and you're going to be targeted. Your family are going to be targeted. Your stuff is going to be sent everywhere. That's why I don't think anybody under 25 should be doing it. But I also think that sex work as a whole needs to be decriminalised as well, because when we put these things in place, we don't protect the workers. We don't protect the workers. We actually restrict them. So if something happens in a setting, we actually have no sort of support. We have no support system to go to. We have nowhere to go. The police don't take us serious. So for me, when I look at it, it comes back to the rise of patriarchy. And I want to say, Harper, I think you brought it up, and actually it was you that sort of made me think about it. Everything you were saying about patriarchy and porn, it all starts at home. I'm a parent. I believe that parents need to educate their kids, and it starts at home. Thank you.
It's always a challenge to follow Aaliyah in a debate, but regardless, I'm honored to close out the debate for the opposition this evening. Let me make something very clear. I'm not here to argue about my personal opinions on OnlyFans content or whether or not I think that it's a feminist or empowering venture. Quite frankly, I don't think that's what this debate is about. The reality is that no one on either side of this bench has the exact same viewpoints on OnlyFans, pornography, or the sex work industry as a whole. Everyone who has spoken tonight has displayed strong arguments for their cases as to whether or not they regret the rise of the platform, but it's also evident that everyone's opinions are different, even those who are sitting on the same side of the bench. This is a divisive topic on which no two people in this room will think identically. We stand here tonight battling out emotion related to one of the world's oldest professions. It's been practiced for thousands of years, and it shows no sign of stopping anytime soon. But what we're discussing here in this chamber is not about the validity of the industry, but something else entirely. Because regardless of our individual opinions about sex work, we should all be able to agree that sex workers themselves are entitled to safety and human rights. Last year, the United Nations published a special repertoire on the rights of sex workers, stating that they experience different human rights violations in their everyday lives, and that the most important things we can strive to ensure they have are the rights to equality, health, and freedom from violence. No sex worker, regardless of anyone's personal opinion on the legitimacy of their profession, should ever be put in a position where they feel endangered because of their career. To say otherwise violates the very tenets of basic human rights and safety. If safety, therefore, is a united priority for all sides, I argue before the House tonight that OnlyFans, while imperfect, is currently the safest available option that we have for adult content creation. Let me first cover some logistical aspects of the site that make it a secure option for sex work. It directly connects creators to their subscribers, ensuring that they don't have to go through a third party that might open them up to exploitation. Creators and subscribers alike have to pass through a number of checkpoints and submit identity verification checks to set up their accounts, and all personal information is encrypted to protect against cyber attacks. Part of what makes OnlyFans different from other adult sites is that subscribers pay creators directly to access their content, giving them an amount of agency and safety that is often lacking or entirely absent in other mediums of sex work. The site only takes a 20% cut and then gives creators 80% of the revenue from their content, ensuring that they are paid fairly and that the majority of their revenue is not lost to other parties. Moreover, there are protections in place to prevent content from leaving the site, such as anti-screenshot technology, with the site stating that they are dedicated to delivering robust safeguards that prioritize the safety, privacy, and well-being of their community. Dr. Karras has brilliantly pointed out that historically, this sort of agency is groundbreaking when one considers the long history of sex work, and that OnlyFans is making leaps for safety and autonomy within the industry. To touch on Harper's argument that pornography inherently promotes rape culture through violent dominance, I raised the point that not all OnlyFans creators are creating pornographic content, and that many users of the site are actually creating solo content in which they are not inherently exposed to the risk of STIs or sexual violence, which are factors that are larger safety issues within the wider industry. Let me also be clear that this debate is about a very specific platform. It is not about sex work as a whole, issues of legalization, or individual creators. It is about the rise of OnlyFans. This opens up a natural gateway for it to be used as a comparative agent to other platforms and mediums of sex work, which I've done in my previous point, and is a tactic that's been utilized by both sides of the House this evening. Many of the arguments made by the proposition tonight are very valid critiques of both OnlyFans and the broader industry that it is a part of. But I believe that many of these are wider systematic issues within the sex work industry and are not unique to OnlyFans. Aaliyah's point about the platform being used to exploit former child stars is a legitimate and grave concern, but comparatively, OnlyFans has taken further precautions to prevent this than other adult sites, and even the entertainment industry, and is reflective of a wider societal issue. When I think of Piper Raquel, Bad Baby, and Lil Tay, I also think of 11-year-old Brooke Shields having to film nude scenes when she played a sex worker in the film Pretty Baby. And furthermore, the thousands of women and children who have been illegally forced into sex work across the world, but especially in places where they are voiceless and have no way in which to advocate for themselves. This is not an issue specific to OnlyFans as a site, but rather a vile stain on society that at large has bled into the entertainment industry, both the mainstream film world and its adult counterpart. Another point of the proposition that I'd like to touch on is this idea that OnlyFans is actively promoting extreme content, which they refer to specifically as extreme challenge content. To many, the site has become synonymous with this kind of content, with a handful of creators having experienced a meteoric rise in fame after hosting events where they attempt to break the world record for the most sexual partners in a day. While events like these are absolutely unsafe and should not be encouraged, it's important to acknowledge that they've existed well before OnlyFans as a site, with the previous world record holder having set the record in 2004. Something else I'd like to point out that hasn't been mentioned yet this evening is that the current world record holder, Bonnie Blue, is actually no longer allowed on OnlyFans. She was permanently banned from the platform this June, with a spokesperson citing the reason for such being her extreme and predatory content going against the terms and conditions of the site. The idea of running events dubbed as human petting zoos is simultaneously deplorable and dangerous. And this also importantly shows that OnlyFans draws a hard line when it comes to health and safety, even when it means cutting off one of the faces of their platform. Whether or not you support OnlyFans, it's difficult to argue that it is not currently the safest medium on which sex work can be conducted. I'm not standing before you to tell you what to think about sex work as an industry, but rather to consider the human rights of those who do it and prioritize that above any of your personal convictions. To view any sex worker as being beneath you, to actively dehumanize them, does not make you woke or holier than thou, but perpetuates and exposes wider societal stigmas surrounding sex workers and actively begets support for unsafe environments in the industry. Like my fellow speakers on the opposition bench, I regret the rise of the patriarchy and misogyny and violence and shame, and I do not regret the rise of OnlyFans because it is the safest choice that we have to counter these forces. To oppose the motion is to work towards a world in which we have a zero-tolerance policy for any sort of violence and degradation of sex workers. And with this, I urge you to vote for the opposition this evening. Thank you.
Thank you to all our speakers today for an excellent debate. Hear, hear. In a moment, we're going to call this house to a vote. I'd just like to remind everybody there will be a post-debate reception afterwards and afters in chaplains. All right, with that said, those in favour of the motion, say yay. Nay. Those in opposition to the motion, say nay. Nay. The nays have it. Thank you very much.